Howdy folks, hope you're all having a good one and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. I wasn't sure there was going to be an episode of Mingles with Jingles today because I had a very rough night. Well, I didn't really have a rough night. My little Maine Coon cat Akazuki had a rough night, which meant that I had a rough night. I'm not entirely sure what was wrong with her. At first I suspected she'd some kind of food poisoning because she was vomiting all night. But, I mean, I kind of ruled that out because she doesn't eat anything that the other cats don't eat. But she does have this weird condition, I think it's called pica, where it's a condition where people and animals like to eat things that aren't actually edible. In her case, she likes nibbling on bits of plastic. I think she may have swallowed a bit of plastic, and that was causing her to vomit. But she's fine this morning. You know, she's not hiding away. She's back to her normal self. She's eating again, which is good. So yeah, that was a rough night for both of us. And she was 4 years old on Friday. Yay! Time flies. It just seems like yesterday she was a tiny little kitten. Anyway, on with the show. So, aside from looking after sick cats, what have I been up to this week? Well, probably won't come as a great surprise, mostly World of Warcraft again. My small but fierce gnome warrior, Twinkypie here, managed to reach level 80 about a week or so just before the new patch hit, with the new tier of raid content. So I had a week to get her geared up and ready for it, and that meant running the current tier of raid content. The problem was the competition was kind of fierce, because you don't need many tanks. I mean, 2, 3 at the most in a 25-man raid group in tier 7 raid content. But I was lucky enough to find a group that was sufficiently desperate that they were willing to give her a chance when her gear was good enough, but not good. And she came out of that raid covered in epic tanking gear. So it literally took 3 days from level 79 and having absolutely terrible gear to level 80 and having not great, but pretty good tanking gear. So that was good. And of course, when you have better gear, it's more likely that you're going to get invited to tank other raids. So she's been doing pretty well. All of which leads us on to our funny gaming story of the week. So, yeah. There are 2 different flavours of raid in World of Warcraft, or more accurately, Wrath of the Lich King Classic right now. The 10-man and 25-man. And with the new patch, you've now got hard modes available for both 10 and 25 in the new tier of raid content. But none of that's important to the story. So I got into a 25-man Naxxramas raid. Now, I don't want to bog you down in all the technical details here, but what you need to know about the last boss in Naxxramas, the Lich Kel'Thuzad, is it's a 2-tank fight. One tank takes on the boss himself, and then when he's reduced to 40% health, he summons a whole bunch of Ice Crown Guardians, giant Crypt Lords basically, that the off-tank has to pick up. In a lot of these raid boss encounters, the main tank's job to tank the boss is actually really, really simple. And this is true on the Kel'Thuzad fight. You just stand in one spot and don't die. And that's your job. The off-tank has a much, much harder job, because there's all kinds of other things that have to be grabbed and tanked so that they don't just run around killing the healers and the DPS. So, of the 2 tanks in this raid, there was me on Twinkypie, a protection warrior tank, and the other tank, who had slightly better gear than me and therefore was the main tank, was a dwarf death knight. He was really good, by the way. He had slightly better gear than me, he was the main tank. Also, he was a dwarf death knight. And there's probably no better tanks in the game at the moment for single target tanking, so it made sense that he would be put on the boss. And as a warrior, I would have the responsibility of picking up the Ice Crown Guardians when they were summoned in at 40%. Because warrior tanks are really, really good at tanking multiple things at the same time. Now, when you do the raid in 10-man mode, I think there are only 2 Ice Crown Guardians, but when you do it in 25-man mode, there are 4 of them. And they're really big, and they hit really, really hard. And they hit harder as the fight goes on. You know, if you take your time killing the boss, at which point the Guardians just run off, and you're done. But the longer the fight goes on, they do a stacking debuff to whoever's tanking them. So it's kind of like an enrage timer. Because if you can't get the boss down in good time, the off-tank is going to die. And then the Guardians will run after the healers, and then everybody else dies. But when it comes to tanking multiple mobs at the same time, Warriors are fantastic, because you've got so many area of effect threat-generating abilities. So the boss, Kel'Thuzad, hits 40%, he calls upon the Lich King to send him aid, and 2 of these Ice Crown Guardians appear from portals at the back of the room. So I toss a heroic throw at one of them, which is guaranteed aggro, and I taunt the other one. And then I start going through my AoE rotation, and that I've got a couple of seconds to do that, and then another 2 appear, and so you rinse and repeat. And once I've got all 4 of them, I start spamming Shockwave, Demoralizing Shout, Shield Block, Revenge, Thunderclap. I've got all kinds of abilities that target everything in front of me and generate huge amounts of threat. Once the threat's been established, I have good solid aggro. All I have to do is just maintain threat and blow my defensive cooldowns. Easy. But then suddenly these Ice Crown Guardians started running off towards the boss, and I'm like, what the hell's going on? Quick, taunt, and it would come back to me for half a second and then immediately start running off towards the boss again. And people are shouting, ads, ads, get the ads, and I'm like, I don't understand what's going on. It turns out that what had happened, and this was not my fault, okay, is that Death Knights have this ability called Army of the Dead, where they summon a whole bunch of ghouls that rise up out of the ground, and they start attacking whatever's around them, attacking and taunting whatever's around them. Now this is fine on a boss fight, because they will not taunt a raid boss. So if you're the one tanking the raid boss, you take, while you're channeling the Army of the Dead summon, you take less damage equal to your parry and dodge chance. So it's a defensive cooldown. And it's also a damage cooldown if you're, for example, a Froster and a Holy Death Knight who's busy stabbing the boss in the back. Because these ghouls are doing damage to the boss as well. And this all counts as damage that you've done. So, you know, it's also an offensive damage cooldown. And while the ghouls will not taunt a raid boss, because that would be really bad if they could. I mean, not so bad on Kel'Thuzad, for example, but there are other bosses that do frontal cleave attacks. And if a ghoul taunts a boss from behind and it turns around and cleaves the ghoul, it's going to kill all of the melee DPS who are standing behind the boss. So not a huge problem on Kel'Thuzad. But a big problem for me, because I was trying to tank the Guardians of Ice Crown, and the ghouls were jumping all over them, taunting and attacking them too, which made it impossible for me to hold aggro. And there's nothing you can do about it. Once the ghouls have been summoned, that's it. Until they die, or the Army of the Dead expires, they will continue attacking and taunting everything around them that they can. Fortunately, it didn't result in a wipe, because the ghouls don't have a huge amount of health. So you taunt an Ice Crown Guardian, it hits the ghoul once, the ghoul's dead. But then another ghoul taunts them. So I had about 15 seconds of furious panics. What the hell is going on here? Before I finally figured out, oh right, one of the Death Knights just popped Army of the Dead. And he kind of admitted quite sheepishly afterwards, after we'd successfully killed the boss, yeah, I think I might know what happened there. It wasn't the tank's fault. Sorry. Well, that could have been a disaster. Fortunately, all's well that ends well. Didn't get any loot from the boss, though. He just didn't drop any tanking loot. And that made me kind of sad. But I did pretty well out of that raid. I got plenty of upgrades. Just nothing from the last boss. They've done some really good stuff with this Uldar raid content patch coming out, which means that, you know, the current raids, the ones that I'm talking about here, they're all yesterday's news now, but there's still a lot of decent gear available from the last 2 bosses, Sapphiron the Undead Dragon and Kel'Thuzad the Lich. In particular, Kel'Thuzad, because the stuff he drops is higher level than everything else in the raid, and it's all the weapons, the stuff that people really, really want. And so they've introduced the ability to skip everything other than Sapphiron and Kel'Thuzad. See, previously, in order to get to Sapphiron and Kel'Thuzad, you had to kill every other boss in the raid. So that's 14 boss fights, and this takes an hour or two. But now, they call them skip raids, where you just skip straight to the last 2 bosses to get all of the good stuff. And this is great, because, think about it, when you've been farming, I mean, obviously this isn't Twinkypie's situation, but for most people who are going to be doing Naxxramas, it's just to get the loot from the last 2 bosses, which is the best loot. Because you don't want to be spending 2 hours killing the 14 other raid bosses who don't drop anything that you need, just to get to the last 2 for a chance at the loot that you do actually need. So these skip runs are fantastic. But I have seen some real scumbag behaviour going on. Because think about it, you're doing the skip run because you just can't be bothered clearing the whole raid. You just want the last 2 bosses. So, you're already in a sort of I can't be bothered to do the whole thing frame of mind, which is fine. That's the whole point of doing a skip run, for example. But there are some people who just take that I can't be bothered doing it properly just that little bit too far. For example, I was in a Naxxramas 25 skip run last night. I'm main tanking it. I'm on Sapphiron, the undead dragon, the second last boss. And you do not want Sapphiron to be facing the raid, because he does a frost breath attack and a cleave that will kill anybody who's not a tank. It just does a huge amount of damage. Oh yeah, and it's a dragon, so it does a tail swipe as well. And the tail swipe won't kill you, probably, but it will knock you halfway across the room. And if you're a healer who gets hit by the tail swipe, that's going to put you out of range of the people who need healing. So yeah, that's really bad as well. Basically, on a dragon, you do not stand in front of it unless you're tanking it, and you do not stand behind it unless you want to get tail swiped. So the main tank has to position this boss very, very carefully. But it's not that difficult to do. You just ensure that the raid are facing the side of the boss, and you do your tank thing. And then once I'd done that and established aggro and everything was stable and everybody started unloading on the boss, one of the druid healers ran right in front of me. Remember, it's a dragon. You do not want to be standing in front of a dragon unless you're tanking it. So it did the frost breath attack and the cleave, and this druid dropped like a sack of shit, because obviously it's a dragon. And it was quite deliberate. And then they just lay there dead, wouldn't accept any battle resurrections, because they just couldn't be arsed. They just wanted to be carried. But now we're down a healer. And even worse than that, a druid healer. Because one of the other things that Sapphiron does is a curse. It's a life drain curse, and it will basically suck the life out of anybody who gets hit by it, killing them and transferring the health to and healing the boss. Now, this is obviously a bad thing, but you can decurse. Now, there aren't that many classes available who can remove curses. Mages are one, restoration shamans are another one, as are restoration druids. And our resto druid was lying in a snotty heap in front of me after getting cleaved and breathed on. And we only had one mage. We didn't have any restoration shaman. We were in fact low on healers overall, because it's only Naxxramas, it's easy. And our restoration druid was lying in a snotty heap on the ground in front of me after deliberately running in front of the boss so he could die, and then basically just wait for everybody to kill the boss and he could collect his loot. Which didn't happen, because the only person who could decurse was the mage. And, yeah, everybody died. So, that was fun. The whole raid fell apart after that, of course, in an orgy of recriminations, all because of that one scumbag. I do have to say, though, overall, my experience in Wrath of the Lich King Classic, and I have mentioned this before, has been pretty positive. There has not been an awful lot of scumbaggery going on, at least none that I've witnessed. Well, not none. I've just related one example, but very, very little. And I think it sticks out because it happens so infrequently. Generally speaking, people are pretty good. Oh, hang on a minute. Oh, you couldn't make this shit up. You see what's happening here? Just as I'm talking about how nice everybody is, you see that paladin? We're both clearly doing the same quest. And he sees me over here fighting these 2 mobs. And I'm doing all kinds of thunderclaps and shockwaves and all kinds of area of effect damage and threat generating abilities, and he drags the 2 that he's fighting over to me, clearly hoping that I'll end up in combat with the ones that he's fighting and be forced to help him kill them. I mean, I wouldn't mind, because we're both clearly doing the same quest, if you just throw me a group invitation. You know, I would have been more than happy to help out, but that's just scumbaggery. And I just spent all this time telling you how nice everybody was in Wrath of the Lich King Classic. Right on screen in front of you is an example of somebody being a dick. Well, it's not even really being a dick. I mean, it's just laziness. Because we're clearly doing the same quest. I'm a tank, they're DPS. Look like a Retribution Paladin using a two-hander. So, you know, they're lousy DPS. So you can appreciate why they might want somebody to tank the mobs so that they could kill them faster. And it would have worked out beneficially for me as well, because both doing the same quest, join a group. But the fact that they just didn't ask. Actually, I just realised something as well. That was a level 80. I saw the shoulders that Paladin was wearing. They were the tier 7 Paladin shoulders. So that's a level 80 raid geared Retribution Paladin trying to get a level 77 in quest rewards to help them kill their quest mobs. What a loser. Actually, you know what? Maybe I'm being too hasty here. Because when that Paladin came over, they did pop their Divine Storm, which is an area of effect damage ability that Retribution Paladins have. It's possible that that Paladin was actually trying to help me kill the mobs that I was tanking. They may have just thought, oh look, there's a level 77 there. I'll go over and help them DPS down the mobs that they're tanking. You know, this might just be that I am way too quick to expect the worst of people. That's something I should probably work on. Yeah, that probably says more about me than it does about them. Because, I mean, there were two possible explanations. And I immediately assumed the worst. I should definitely work on that. Well, anyway, in other news, War Thunder this time, I just saw on the PC Gamer News website. Do you remember a couple of years ago, 2021 I think it was, when a War Thunder player posted classified documents on the British Challenger 2 main battle tank to the forums because they were upset because they didn't think Gaijin had implemented the tank properly and broke the Official Secrets Act. In order to, yeah. And then just a couple of months later, in October of the same year, when another War Thunder player decided that they were going to share classified documents on the French Leclerc 2 main battle tank for exactly the same reasons. And then in June of 2022, when somebody posted classified details, and by the way, you can get the death penalty for this in China, classified details on the Chinese 125mm anti-tank round. Or just a few days ago, when, again on the War Thunder forums, somebody who was upset about the way the F-16 Fighting Falcon had been implemented into the latest patch of the game shared restricted documents regarding the F-16 Fighting Falcon. Where, oh where is this all going to end? Well, possibly with an execution, if you're the guy who posted the details of the Chinese 125mm anti-tank round, and certainly with some lengthy jail sentences if you're any of the people who've been posting classified documents regarding American military aircraft. But it's probably not going to end anytime soon, because literally days after the details of the F-16 were leaked, somebody did the same thing again with operations manuals regarding the F-15 Eagle. And here's the kicker, right? The person who leaked the operations manuals on the F-15 Eagle can't even use the same excuse that everybody else has been using because they were upset that they didn't think Gaijin had implemented their favourite aircraft or vehicle into the game correctly, because the F-15 Eagle isn't even in the game. It's just that there was a forum thread started where people were saying, would you like to see the F-15 in the game? And yeah, this happened. So, War Thunder players, seriously, it's just a game. You really do have to stop taking this shit so seriously. Turns out it was the same person who posted the classified documents on the F-16. Apparently they didn't learn their lesson the first time. I mean, the wheels of justice turn slowly, so they probably haven't gotten around to being arrested yet. But they tried to claim that, no, this is fine, none of these documents are classified. Yet the documents that they leaked, and we're talking about the F-15 manual here, clearly say, distribution authorized to the Department of Defense and US Department of Defense contractors only, critical technology, warning, this document contains technical data whose export is restricted by the Arms Export Control Act, Violation of these export laws are subject to severe criminal penalties. It's right there on the first page of the stuff you leaked. Dude, seriously, if reading is that hard, maybe you should have just been a stripper. And on that bombshell, that's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you all had a great weekend. I hope the week isn't going to suck too much. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.